Good afternoon, everyone. Is everyone awake? I'm so excited that people stayed for the end of the conference. Yeah. And now the challenge is to stay awake the whole time, but I promise I'm going to be very loud and make you do things. So you're going to have to stay awake for this, unfortunately. So I'm Michelle. I've been working at Netflix for about 4 years now, but when I first started, I was pretty nervous because they gave me a chance to learn Java on the job, and like any new employee, I really wanted to prove myself. So when my boss called me in for my 6 month checkup, he sat me down and he said, Michelle, I like it when you say you're going to do things, you do them. And I said, what? Because I thought that was just the baseline for every professional. It didn't seem noteworthy or special. But on reflection, I realized that yes, while everyone should be doing that, they should be saying they're going to do something and then doing it. Not everyone was, especially my team. So I worked with my team and worked them through a process over an entire year. And after that happened, I built this talk. So why was my team over-promising and under-delivering? Well, it was because they had the engineer mindset. And what's the engineer mindset? The engineer mindset is everything is easy. So raise your hand if you've ever gotten a task or a feature and someone gave it to you and you said, wow, this is super easy. I'm going to get this done right away. And it was not super easy and you did not get it done right away. Yeah, okay, that is literally everyone, because we just think of hard problems and we think of solutions and we're just ready to go. So today I'm going to talk about the project management mindset, which you're going to add on to your engineer mindset to help you manage and document yourself so you're always delivering what you say you're going to deliver. Oh, the clicker is not my friend today, so we're just going to use the mouse. So the project management mindset includes being reliable, documenting what you are doing, and both of those combining to have a fantastic brand. You're an awesome engineer who does great work, and everyone should know that. So being reliable means spending extra time in planning, then adding lots of breathing room for the unexpected. So I've been working in tech for about 13 years now, and at the beginning of my career, I'd get tasks like, when the user does this, this happens, or add this feature, this specific feature. But after all this time of being a senior engineer, I get, using your expertise, can you just make the product better? Just really ambiguous. So if I didn't use my project management skills, I would be floundering. So documenting what you're doing is not just technical documentation. There are lots of talks on that, and including there was one at this conference. Documenting what you're doing is documenting yourself. Most people wait until they absolutely have to, like during a performance review time or when updating their resume. Then you scramble to remember what you did 6 months ago. I have to write notes to myself on Friday so that I remember what I was working on for Monday. So I definitely can't remember what I was doing 6 months ago. So both of these combine to build your personal brand. I like this quote from, of all people, Jeff Bezos. Your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. That means even if you don't work on your brand at all, you have a brand. I'm going to help you be proactive and shape your brand instead of letting other people's assumptions do that for you. And finally, it's not just about your brand, it's about your team's brand and what people say about your team when they're not around and what you can accomplish together. When I had that meeting with that boss and I realized that I was personally doing well, but my team wasn't as focused as it could be, I've seen this repeatedly in my career. A skilled team just needs like a little bit of process and they could have faster velocity. So let's talk about that. How did I do it? How did I change the team to have more of a project management mindset? I started with building team consensus. No one likes you to walk in a room and say, hey, You're doing everything wrong, but don't worry. Just listen to me and everything will be okay, right? Because we're all professional adults, and just coming in and saying that you're not going to get that enthusiastic buy-in. So what you have to do is get everyone to agree. And even before you start the solution, you have to go way back. You have to start with, is there a problem? Because for some people, they'll think everything is great. I do my work, I go home, everything is good. But might not be how people think of you or think of your team. So first is agreeing there is a problem. And then second is identifying what the problem is. Like, what is preventing you from having happy stakeholders and getting things done and having things go well? Like, what is the root of that problem? So if people, usually teams, they know when something is off, but if they don't, you can kind of bring in evidence from stakeholders, like people who aren't feeling your team. So, and if any point during the discussion the team tries to veer into solution, you want to stop and be like, until we agree what the problem is, we shouldn't do a solution. But we'll get there soon. So in the case of my team, we narrowed the problem down to a perceived lack of progress, right? How many of you thought you were doing really well and you were killing it, but your stakeholders were like, they're not doing any work? Has that ever happened to you? Right? Yeah. A few people. All right. Yeah. Everyone else is doing awesome, which is great, but we could do even better. I'm gonna convince you. So how do we change that brand? Okay. Now we're gonna do solutions. This is where everyone has an idea. It's like bike shedding, right? Where everyone has an idea of what color the bike shed should be. They think this process is going to work. No, this process is going to work. No, if we just tweak it a little. We have 3 people on a team. No, 4 people on a team. No, Tuesday sprints, right? Like, everyone has an idea. But how do we know it'll work? How do we know that people are actually going to follow through with the process, right? So what do we do when we have code and we don't know whether it's going to work? We test it. So that's what trial periods are for. It's for testing out the process to see if it'll actually work. So instead of doing a lot of back and forth and long meetings and just everyone arguing what it actually should be, I say hey, let's just pick something. Let's try it out for 3 months, and then when we have some sort of data, we'll see how it went and we'll decide if we want to change anything. So the other important thing, and I'm going to talk about this a couple times, is that you shouldn't have too many changes simultaneously. It's just too hard. I was thinking about on New Year's Day when everyone's like, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week, starting today. Starting January 1st, every day I'm going to the gym. And then January 6th, that is done, right? That was just too hard of a change. How are you going to change that so much? So instead, maybe say, hey, I'll go to the gym once a week and hang out and see how it goes and get used to that. And then maybe a second time. So it's all about one change at a time. So I have a little warning here about glue work. When you start changing process, you might need to do glue work. And if you're unfamiliar with the term, you should definitely watch the presentation by Tanya Riley, who coined it, or the blog post. But to give you a quick summary, it's basically the administrative work that keeps the team moving along, right? All that project management work. So the downside of doing this is that it can be tedious, unappreciated, and take away from your technical growth. And now you're like, Michelle, I hate your presentation. I'm not going to do any of that, and I'm out, right? But really, to compensate for this, any work you do should actually be considered a leadership skill, right? Because while process improvement isn't kind of the first thing you think of as a technical leader, it's extremely valuable to your company. Because when you increase your team's velocity and when you have them doing the right problems and you create that flywheel of success, that's the best thing you can be doing for your team and your company, is creating that high value of more features going out, more things that could be happening, and making your company more money. So it actually can be spun in a very positive way. And the next is to make it as easy for yourself as possible. So I have a little bit of a confession. I love organizational tools. I just want to play with all of them. I love Evernote. I love Airtable. I love Notion. Any new one that comes up, I've even learned how to use Jira. So I just want to like add pretty colors and automation to just get everything correct and the right tables and the right, connections right away. But that's not the right thing to do, right? Because the process is going to be constantly changing, especially in the beginning. Just make it as easy for yourself as possible. So in my case, I just use a Google Doc, which is messy, but everyone can edit it and it's just easy to see. And then as the process goes along, you can start like adding in tools and things. Just like an app, right? You don't want to make the whole thing at once. You start with the MVP and you add features. Okay, so one step that is often missed in planning is the migration plan. I've seen this over and over with process changes. You say, you know what? We're going to reorg and this team's going to do this and you're going to do it like this and your team's going to do it like this and you're going to do it like this. Except all those teams are already in the middle of doing things and they don't stop doing them. They just keep doing them. And then this idea just like floats away, like, oh, where did that idea go? We never did it. So why is that? Because you didn't make a plan to get from A to B. So that's a crucial part of this. So for my team's migration plan, I had everyone write down everything that we're working on, the known projects, the secret projects, 1 to 2 sentences, what is it? And then how can they wrap it up in the next 2 weeks? How can you get to some stopping point, some deployment, some I'm good as far as this goes? And then if they have any part of it, they're like, no, I want to do more on this. I was like, okay, write a mini proposal and we'll bring it into the prioritization exercise, which we're going to do next. So yeah, let's look at those ideas and bring them to the next exercise. I'm going to get a drink. Okay. This is the impact effort matrix. So the impact is on the y-axis and the effort is on the x-axis. It's just 2 arrows put together. So you can do this with pretty much anything. I've done this in person with little post-its and a whiteboard where I just drew it. Or you can use like a Google Jamboard or a Miro board if you're remote, which my team is. So the first step is you give everyone time to write out every project or task they'd like to do. It's kind of a 2 to 3 word summary. You have a nickname for all your projects and just put them up. Then these all go into a big pool. And before you organize it, just make sure to do a deduplication because sometimes people will just have the same idea but write it slightly differently. So you can ask like, oh, is this the same exact project? Okay, so after that, you want to move them into their correct square. Is it high impact, low effort? Is it low impact, high effort, right? So the idea being that this is kind of a feelings exercise. It's deceptively simple, right? Because people have different mental models of what is effort and what is impact, right? There's no data here of like how many customers it's going to affect. It's just how do we kind of feel right now? It's not supposed to be perfect. And I tell the team not to stress out too much about where you put it right away because it's only a draft. And the idea is that it drives discussion, right? So we're using this to have a conversation, to frame it. So I always start the discussion at that top left, that high impact, low effort. And the reason being because of that engineering mindset where every engineer thinks everything is easy, right? So they always say, oh, this is going to have the best impact and also just like take me like 1 or 2 days and I can just knock it out, right? So I talk about it. I say, do you think you could get this done in 2 weeks with 1 to 2 people? And like, let's talk about all the steps that'll go into it. And once I get up to step 10, they're like, oh, maybe it's not low effort. So you can do one of 2 things. You can move it into high impact, high effort, or you can reduce the scope, right? So you can turn it into a design task or a research task or just like a small like, oh, I'll just do 1 endpoint and see if it works task, right? So something to kind of prove it out. That same idea of like, can we have something to show the stakeholders before you do the entire thing and invest all those resources in it? That's what I prefer is if you descope. And then you can, the next quarter we can go in and do more phases of it if it works out. So after all the post-its are moved to their correct effort square, it's time to talk about impact. So is this actually high impact? Will it Will it increase revenue or decrease churn? Will it eliminate a large amount of manual work? Like, what do you mean by high impact? Do you think it'll be? So sometimes users complain about something a lot, but it's not something that happens that often. I'm sure we've all experienced it. Like, they do something once a month and it takes them an extra 30 seconds, and then every time they do it, they complain about it, but it really only took them a short amount of time. And that shouldn't be prioritized over something that like actually affects a lot of users or affects them every day, right? So that would be more in the low impact area. So you want to move that to correct square. Not that like you're going to ignore these completely. It's just good to know what they are so you can prioritize. So another way to look at impact is not just to see the positive impact. Like, the positive impact is when I do this, this will happen, right? There's also the negative impact. If I don't do this, what will happen? Like, what does someone have to do because this isn't going to happen, right? Is it, like I said, is it like a lot of manual work? Is it a lot of, are we not going to get customers? Are we going to lose customers? Things like that. So it's like a nice way to turn it around so you can see all sides of the impact. Okay. So now that you have all the tasks in the right square, you want to prioritize all those high impact tasks. For the low impact, low effort tasks, like I said, you can't ignore those completely. You want to like mix those in. It kind of creates that goodwill, right? Like, you know, when someone bugs you about something and you finally do it after 6 months, they're just like, oh my God, that's all I've ever wanted you to do. Like, thank goodness you fixed it. And you're like, great. Moving on to like bigger tasks. But it's nice to have, so don't forget about those. So those low impact, high effort tasks, those are the ones you actually throw in the trash. Those are what I call thankless tasks. You're going to work really hard on them, and it's not going to affect things, right? You might think, well, we kind of have to do this because of this. It's like, well, do you? You said it would have low impact, right? Like, what is it going to do for us? And you don't have unlimited time. You can't do every task. So it's important to say, hey, these are probably never going to get done. The only thing you need to watch out for is to ignore the technical problems, right? The tech debt, the security updates, things like that. And you can't just say like, oh, it's going to have low impact. It's going to have low impact on the business, but it might end up having, it's that negative impact. It might have high impact if you never do it. If you never do that security patch, right? If you never do those upgrades, that eventually might have high impact. So don't lose track of those if you need those to happen. And then that's that whole exercise, right? So I'm sure you could all go do this now because it's just 2 arrows and a bunch of little squares. So I believe that you're going to remember this and you're going to do this, and it's going to be great. Because at the end of this exercise, your team should have now a list of their prioritized tasks. This is what the team thinks we should do. Okay, but what do your stakeholders think? So let's talk about stakeholders. I like to think of them in 3 different levels. Right? I'll start with management. Management is anyone from right above you all the way to the CEO. The way I group management is they're focused on business goals and revenue impact of your work. They don't care about how you get things done. They care about how much do you cost and what are you doing for me, right? So they should also be able to provide a general framework of business goals, right? As an engineer, you're not just solving hard problems, you're making the business better. So what do the people in charge of the business want you to do, right? So that should be helpful in framing your prioritization. It also helps if you need to do something and it's not on the priority list for management, so you know how to explain it, right? So if someone comes to you and like, hey, I saw your team is doing this, but it's not one of our business priorities. Our business priority is reduce churn, increase sales. But this technical ticket is neither of those, so you need to stop doing it. And then you'll have an explanation before you get there. So you're ready for that conversation, whether it's a scheduled meeting or they just kind of like pop by and ask you, what the heck your team is doing. So it's good to have that. Next level are your peers. That's anyone you need to collaborate with to get a larger project done, right? Sometimes this is called like your first team, basically designers, DevOps, security, any other teams other engineering teams that you work with to get things done. You need to fit your priorities with them, because you could be a blocker to them or they could be a blocker to you, and you should know about it. You should know, hey, I need, to get task A done, you need to do task B. Oh, they're never going to do task B in the next 6 months? Okay, I guess we can't do task A. Or can you prioritize task B is really important to the company. So it's important to have those conversations so you know if there'll be any technical blockers on either end. And then finally, there are the users. This is the primary users of whatever you're working on. So it could be the general public to other engineers in your company to other, B2B business users. So sometimes they'll volunteer feedback, but it's great if you can proactively go get it, right? If you can watch them work, or, if it's get user feedback groups, anything like that where you can get feedback for them is really important, whether it's directly or indirectly through other teams. You want to know what their pain points are. Okay, so let's talk about how we talk to the stakeholders now that we know who the three are: the users, your peers, and management. I'm somehow losing my voice already. This is very strange. See if I can make it through 20 slides. I'll do my best to communicate effectively, which is what this slide is about. So, you don't just need to communicate with them. You need to communicate effectively to have that positive brand with them, right? And then in order to be effective, you should practice these three skills. And it's clear expectations, communicating often, and sharing changes. So I'm going to go through each of those. Setting clear expectations means, again, don't overpromise to impress anyone. You don't need to be working, 20 hours a day. You need to tell them, this is the reasonable amount of work that we can get done, and then that's how it's going to be, right? And if there's pushback, that's a conversation you have, like, well, we need more resources, or we need to change the date on something. It shouldn't be, well, just work more hours until you fall asleep at your desk. That's not the right conversation to have in a room full of professionals. And also, providing more is always better than not doing what you promised. So I can't repeat this enough to just buffer your estimates, because it always seems easier than it is. The other thing is to communicate often. And I'm not saying more meetings. Please, no more meetings. We don't need them. They cost a lot of money. It is great, asynchronous updates, right? So I've done everything from extreme version, which is I've gotten daily updates, weekly updates, that sort of thing. But usually they just need like monthly or quarterly updates. They know you're not ignoring the project that they want to get done, right? And even in my daily updates, I would do things like, I worked on this yesterday, it didn't work, and now I'm working on it again today. Or like, I tried these 5 things, didn't work, going to try 5 more today, right? Or I finished this feature, I'm doing this next feature. It doesn't have to be a lot of information. As long as you're continuously updating them, people seem to be really happy with that. And then, as part of communicating often, is sharing good and bad major changes as soon as possible and as clearly as possible. This problem is blocking us, so it's going to push us 2 months. Or this person had to jump on an urgent task. We're not doing this anymore. Or this person quit. We can't do this anymore, right? So like all the big things, we should say as soon as possible. You shouldn't just say like, the rest of the team will just have to work harder and never sleep again, right? We don't want to do that. And then hiding problems also just gets people really mad at you. It's like way better to just, rip off that Band-Aid and say the thing that's not good. Even if it means you failed at something, it's better than failing and then hiding and making it worse, right? It'll just make things, escalate. And if you're not going to get something done by the deadline, it's better for them to know so they could possibly push the deadline or change what that demo is going to be or change the scope of the features. All of that's way better than hiding things. I've worked with people who've hid things, and I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, now it's the deadline. We can't release this. So if you told me 3 weeks ago, it would have worked out. And it's just treating people as professional, reasonable adults, and sometimes they will be if you treat them that way. Oh, and I wanted to add, before we get into this prioritization voting, if you have technical stakeholders, it can be good to explain what's going on, so they know, because they're gonna have the same brain as you, and they're gonna be like, why is this taking extra long? That's so easy, right? They're gonna have the same exact thought. So sometimes adding a little more can help. Okay, So this is the second exercise. One of the challenges that I experienced with my stakeholders when I went to them and said, I want to know what your priorities are, right? Like, what is your strategy? What are you going to get done? What do you need? What do you need from us? They would just kind of like look at me with like a blank stare, and then we just end the meeting early because no one had any information. And I was like, okay, that clearly didn't work. And, like I said, I try different processes if the first process doesn't work, right? So that didn't work. So I was like, well, maybe the problem is I had a blank page. And I told them to envision a future without any context. So instead I said, okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you all those ideas we just came up with from the prioritization voting and any like feedback we've gotten before. And I'm going to tell you all the things that we want to work on, and you get to vote, right? It's not about like, you don't have to come up with your own ideas. You can just vote for that. So I gave them all just like 3 votes. And I put sticky notes here, but I just did it digitally with them and had them put like their names on a Google Doc. It was super simple. The worry here was that they would all vote for different things, right? And then I'd be like, well, this didn't help. Making everything a priority means nothing is a priority. But in fact, they all voted for like the same 2 things. There were like 10 votes on each. And I was like, great. This made it very clear what's important to you. Okay, after you have your strategy in place, it's time to talk tactics, right? So you have your prioritized list, you're ready to go, and like, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do that like daily and weekly tracking? So a lot of people do, Agile and Scrum, and they have all these rituals, and they're like, if we just do 2-week sprints, this will work out. If we just do daily stand-ups, if we just walk the board, that'll solve the problem. But I'm not going to prescribe any of that because I don't know your team. I don't know what your team likes. I don't know how remote you are. Maybe you work different hours, so having sprints doesn't make sense. But there's 2 things I want you to keep in mind when you're designing your process. It needs to be simple, and it needs to be transparent, right? The simple means limiting the amount of work that is not solving technical problems. Because engineers, we like coding, and we don't like updating JIRA tickets. So if you have too much process, they just won't do it. They'll say like, oh, great, thanks for the new process, and then just like walk away and ignore you. So keep it simple, and people will get used to it. It becomes a habit. So if it's like a little thing you have to do every day or a little thing you have to do every week, you start to do it, and it becomes a habit, right? And then you're going to the gym every week. And then maybe later we can add that like second, like you had a cardio day. Maybe we'll add like a weights day in a couple of weeks. But like, let's just do that one day, see how it goes, right? And make it super simple. And then transparency means making it easy for anyone on the team to see all the work and all the progress. Who's working on what and how they're doing on it, right? So transparency actually solves a ton of different problems. And I'm gonna name some of them so you know what they get solved. But this is not exhaustive. There's even more things I'm sure it solves. So how many of you have ever been in a meeting and learned that a team member has been working on a secret project and didn't do anything on what they were supposed to be working on? Has that ever happened to anyone? Yeah, a couple of people? All right. Okay, so why does this happen? It can happen when, say, someone goes directly to them. Like, they don't ask in the right channel. They just DM them and say, like, oh, can you just do this thing for me? It'll be, like, real quick. Can you just, like, get this done? And we're all, like, people pleasers, and we can't stop ourselves. We're like, all right, I can't wait to solve this problem for you, and you're going to be really happy with me. That's going to be great. Until you get to the team meeting, and everyone's like, why didn't you do anything you said you were going to do? So this really bypasses those team priorities and should be avoided. Another problem transparency solves is the unequal distribution of work. I'm sure you've seen it where like one person has 10 tickets and another person has 1 ticket, and that 10 ticket person is like frantically trying to get things done all week, and the 1 ticket person's like, this was great. I got to go to the beach 4 days this week. What a wonderful week, And it's not great. Like, you want to have an equal distribution. Everyone should have a reasonable amount of work so they can live their lives. And then get most of it done so they can be proud of themselves, right? Like, it doesn't feel good every week not to be getting what you said you're going to get done, right? You're like, oh, I said I was going to get done 10 tickets, and I only get 5 done every week, so 5 always goes to the next week. It doesn't feel good. So it's better to just say, oh, I'll just have 5 tickets, and get them always done. So a third problem, I'm going to do 4 so you know how long this is going to take. A third problem transparency solves that it makes it obvious when the team has that last in, first out mentality, where every time someone asks the team to do something, someone on the team has to drop what they're doing, change context, and just work on that thing. And that causes like a ton of problems. For one is that cost from context switching and remembering what you're working on. And then the other, the cost is that you don't get done any of that planned work, and that's like really demoralizing and definitely lowers velocity. So you don't want that last in, first out. You want to actively plan things in. Sometimes there'll always be an urgent request that comes in, but over time, if it seems everything is urgent and everything's always pushing other things, you need to, revamp that process. And finally, it can solve siloing, right? When this happens all the time, where one person works on something, and then another problem comes in the same section of the code, and you're like, oh, that person was working on it. Jane was so good at that. Let's keep letting Jane work on that. And Jane just works on that, and Jane just works on that. And then they're the expert on that set part of the project, and no one else ever works on it, and they're the only one that knows. And then Jane's like, I'm bored out of my mind. I only do one thing, and then she quits. And then no one knows how to do it with that part of the project, right? So that's what happens all the time. So you want that transparency so you can see like, hey, I noticed that you doing a lot of this and this person's doing a lot of that. Maybe we can just switch it up a little bit, and you take one ticket. And that's how I had to do a front end ticket. It was very sad for me. I had to do one. Very sad. Okay. We talked about transparency and we talked about simple, which is great. And now we're going to move on to a totally different direction, and we're going to do documentation. Remember at the beginning when I said that we had some documentation to do? So here it is. So I want you to think back. Do you remember what task you were working on 3 months ago? Do you remember what you were working on 6 months ago? I mean, that's like, I don't even know, right? I live in Los Angeles, so every day is 72 and sunny. So I can't even use like the weather. I can't even be like, well, it was cold then, so, I had a database problem. It was just like, well, that day was warm and I did a ticket, and that day was warm and I did a ticket. I have no idea, right? So you should write it down. That's what we're going to do here. And I know I talked about like limiting administrative work, but this is one of the things that will really help you not flounder when performance reviews or resume time or any of those things happening, and it'll also make you feel really good. So I'm going to use a specific format that really helps both with your personal growth and with communicating to stakeholders. So this is the format. These are called success statements. I like how none of these are surprises. Like I'm always like, oh, I'm going to talk about something, but it's like been on the board the whole time. So everyone's like, oh yeah, I know what you're going to talk about. Anyway, let's talk about success statements. I improve this thing by this measurable amount using this method, right? It's very formal. Every time I do a success statement, I like leave this at the top of my screen so I don't forget, because I'll always write it wrong if I don't do it, right? So this is the format. I'm going to show you some examples. So this is my first example. Success statements are short, easy to read sentences that describe a specific accomplishment, and that's what this is. I added a new way for customers to find us, increasing sales 15% by connecting with a third-party API, right? This is high level, and anyone internally can understand and be impressed for this, right? Like, I didn't say all the work I did in here, right? I didn't go too technical. I did say connecting with a third-party API if people really want to know. But the important thing for some people is I increased those sales 15%. But maybe for your resume or your performance review, it's like, oh, you connected a third-party API. That's a new skill. That's great. Let's put that down. Let's do a second one. I reduced storage costs by $500 monthly by switching to a different storage system. So this uses money, which is great. Another thing that you could use is time, right? So if you save time, you're saving money because of labor costs, right? But this is another way you save money on a daily basis. People love seeing money, right? And this is saving. So the other one was sales, which is growth, but they're both equally, valid here. So whether you're saving money or you're increasing revenue, both of those things increase profit, so they're both good to show. And then one more. I reduced the time spent doing manual tests 60 minutes weekly by creating automated tests. So here's our time, right? Now we have all three examples. We have revenue, savings, time, which are all great. They're all measurable amounts. And that's really key, is to think about your work in measurable amounts, right? The best way to do it is when you plan something out and say like, oh, I know what impact this is going to have. And you like write it down so that when you're done, it's easy to do in the success statement. But even if you don't, you can then go back later and figure out how much savings you have, or how much time you saved, or how much money you made. Okay. I know writing in a specific format takes practice because I've done this a lot. So I'm going to do 2 things for you to make it easier for you. First, at the end of this talk, you're going to get a gift from me, which is an extended worksheet that help you create not only success statements, but also your brag sheet and your elevator pitch as well. It's going to help you write them all out. Second, we're going to do a little practice right now. When I warned you, I said you're going to do something. Now's when you're going to do something. So I'd like you to take out your phone, go to any notes app, and write down one success you've had in the last month, right? What is something you improved by a measurable amount, and what method did you use? And then after you're done, I want you to turn to the person next to you and tell them what you did. And then I'm just going to give you a few minutes, so go ahead and start now and see if I can get my music to play. Nope, play. Stopped. Heard. Clearly I don't know how to use my own slides. I see some people starting to look up, so I think you're almost ready for your success statement. So don't forget to share with the person next to you or anyone nearby. They really want to know. I mean, I can't wait to find out. lot of sharing, which made me very excited, and I want to thank you for doing that. Okay, so now I want to see, does anyone want to share with me and with everyone? It would be really cool. I really want to hear it. And plus, you'll feel so proud of yourself thinking about what cool thing that you accomplished. Does someone want to tell me someone else's that they told them? What? 100%? I didn't even know that was possible. Ah, that's perfect. I love it. There's nothing I like better than also like goals that you've already accomplished and then writing them down as your goals so you can check it off. But that's actually really impressive that you had no tests and you convinced people to write tests and then you got those tests written. That's a really cool goal. And then your impact is probably there's less downtime, there's less people getting paid, so less people working, things like that. I'm just going where extrapolating. In the future, you can say like this is what I've accomplished because we have tests, all right? Those are all really cool things you can do. Anyone else before I move on? Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. Okay. So you all have at least one success statement. And when you get home, you're going to journal a whole bunch more. I know that. So you're going to have a ton of success statements. So what do you do with all your success statements? You celebrate, right? I noticed that many teams actually skip this step. They don't do any sort of review of what they've done before, and then you just start the next project. You end a project Friday, it goes out, Monday you have a new project. There's a few reasons I think this is a missed opportunity and why you should always celebrate your successes. First, there's team morale. Work can seem pointless if it's just like an endless stream of tasks without stopping to celebrate. Why am I working so hard? What impact am I having? Pausing to look at everything the team accomplished can reinvigorate them for the next chunk of work. You don't necessarily need a pizza party, but a pizza party doesn't hurt. Like, it's nice, right? And, your version of a pizza party. Second, you can check in and say, are we on the right track? Are we doing impactful work? Were we able to get done what we said we would? If not, why not? And then at that point, I'd like to focus on issues with the process instead of on individuals. I would ask, did we take on too many last-minute requests? Instead of saying, John, why did you do any work last quarter? Why isn't none of it done? And that's very accusatory. It also focuses on one person instead of what's going on with the whole team. And if something really happened with John and he didn't do any work last quarter, that's a question for an individual conversation, right? You want your teams to be a little more positive. The third is showing off to management. So showing off can have this bad connotation, but I think of it as really providing context to management. I always want to make things easy for management. That's like a life hack. If you want anything from your manager, just come with a solution instead of a problem, right? I always think about that when dealing with anyone in management. You want to make it easy for them to see how great your team is and easy to make decisions in your favor. You don't want them ever to think, I don't know what this team does. Maybe we should cut them, right? We have budget cuts. We need to cut someone, and I've never heard of this team. I don't know what they do because it's confusing and hard. So I'm going to cut them. Instead, you want them always to be thinking, man, this is my favorite team. Look how much they get done every quarter. They're just the best team. We're going to definitely cut this other team that doesn't do any work. Your team is an asset to the company. And then finally, there's career resilience. So I have a whole separate talk about this, but I'm going to summarize. Career resiliency is about being ready to explain what you've been working on and your impact at any time. Like I said, you'll never know when you need to find a new job quickly, but you do know you'll eventually have a performance review, right? That comes up in every company. So having all your accomplishments already documented means you'll be ready for whatever happens. And then you'll notice that these reasons include something for everyone. It's very rare that one thing can be good for the individual, the team, and the company, but this one is. So I want you to do this. It's a win for every group. So I mentioned in the last slide bragging to management, and then let's dig a little deeper on how we do that, right? Because we don't want to just give them like a 10-page document of all your success statements, right? We want to think of reporting at work as marketing reports. Marketing is all about the audience. What do they understand? What do they want to hear? What do they have time for, right? You got to put your audience first. For management, you want them to feel like this is just the best, most impactful team ever. But they're busy. They don't want to know the details, just like clear facts that they can report to their bosses. It makes me feel like I've done something right if I give a report to my boss and he gives it to his boss and he gives it to his boss, and at no point has that report changed. They feel like they can keep putting that report up the chain, right? Because it was very clear what everyone's working on. And don't hesitate to change things if you find your format doesn't work. I had to go through like 3 different formats before I found that right format at my job right now. So like initially I tried out a newsletter with a lot of pictures and they didn't like that. And then they actually liked all text memos. I was very surprised because my GIFs were very cool looking. But you know, it depends what people want to see, right? And that's what you want to write towards. And then for the content, you want to stick to the impact first. You basically take the success statements and you merge a bunch of them together, right? You add all that money up, you add all that time, you find like the big trends, and that's what you pass along, right? So if you're on your team, say your team has 50 success statements, you want to mush it together to 5 really big ones and really highlight those big changes every quarter. So, and ideally, none of this is a surprise to them because you had clear communications from the start and they know everything that was happening. They know the things you want and then the things you might have missed and why you missed them, things like that. Okay, by a show of hands, tell me if you found at least one thing valuable in this talk today. Wow, that is so exciting. I've never asked this question before, so I was crazy nervous, but makes me very happy. Okay, if you found at least one thing valuable today, if you would give a gift back to me, it would be to take 2 minutes and fill out a very short survey. So all you have to do is take out your phone, open your camera app, scan the QR code, and put in the code PME, or go to that link at the bottom. That'll also work. So I want to know what you liked about my presentation so I can do more of it. I also want to know what you disliked about my presentation so I can do less of it. Like that part where I asked you to share and no one wanted to, I know not to do a little less of that. That's really helpful because I'm on a mission to help every engineer be the best that they can be so you can focus on the fun stuff. So, and then as a thank you for giving me this feedback, I'm going to give you that gift I mentioned, that worksheet that'll help you write success statements, a brag sheet, and an elevator pitch. So 2 minutes, scan the QR code, and give me feedback. And then when you're done taking the survey, just put your phone down, look up, so I know when people are done. I see a few people have already starting to look up, so that's good. So I know you're almost done. And I chose even more fun waiting music to see if it works. It's all kind of the same jazzy lounge that I wanted to turn this into. about 2 minutes. It looks like I got most people back. I really appreciate doing that. It's going to be really great for me. Okay, one final thought. Now that you're done changing the process and everything's going well, it's time to document it. Because something... Oh, how do I lift the music? The music is still playing. I don't know why I didn't realize that, and just like, I was enjoying it so much, I was like, I'm just going to keep going. Actually, I should just have all my presentations just have like a jazzy background, just like keep things fun. Okay. Feedback for me. Learn how to use music on slides. This is the first time I did that. Okay. Now that you're done changing the process, it's time to document it. Because something I've noticed time and again, both in my career and socially, is that someone will be passionate about something. They will like build a book club up or spearhead a new project, right? And it'll be like super successful. Lots of people will come, lots of cool things will happen. And then they're like, this was great. I've got a new job. Bye. And then it completely falls apart. That book club disappears. That project gets mothballed. No one maintains it anymore, right? So I think about that all the time for the things that I build. And I always want someone to take over. And I want things to live beyond me, right? So the last thing we want to do is for all your hard work to fall apart and when you get that well-deserved promotion. So this is where you write an SOP or standard operating procedure. SOPs are common business tools to document processes. It's kind of a living document of your process that should get adjusted over time. So I order mine by time, right? And I put everything on a schedule. And here you can see like really tiny snippets of it just so I could fit it on the slide. But really you want to be like as detailed as possible. So like week 9, schedule team quarterly review. Who's in that meeting? What's the agenda? What are you going to talk about? What's success look like for that meeting? All of that you should have written there, right? Week 10, get stakeholder feedback on proposals. Like what are these proposals? Who is doing them? Things like that. You want all those details. One thing that happened as soon as I wrote up my first SOP on this process was like, why am I scheduling a meeting every 9 weeks? Why don't I just put it on the calendar every 9 weeks forever, right? Then they can't not have it anymore, right? My team is having a meeting right now without me because I left it on the calendar for them and I made sure that they would do it, right? So anything you can automate, from calendar invites to Jira reports to templates, just throw that in there. This is your time. It's your time to enjoy that automation process that I love. So that's what you want to do. And then, the next thing you want to do is make sure to identify other team members who can help. And so you're not just doing all that glue work yourself. You're spreading it around because everyone should want the team to succeed and not just you. And I always ask my team during these meetings, like, hey, is this process working for you? Do you think things are better now than they were 6 months ago? And they say yes. And then I say, great, can you run the next team meeting? Like, I'm really glad that you liked it. So it's all yours. So that's part of it, is making sure that other people get involved. And you want it to happen before you leave. So they're not, trying to figure things out without you. You want them to figure things out while you're still there to ask questions. And then when you leave, they can take over. Okay. Teams are unique. Jobs are unique. Ideally, you've been thinking through this presentation. Wow, this is valuable information. And Michelle's the best presenter ever. But how do I solve this problem for my team? So this is your time. I think we have, a whopping 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I put some prompts up here and all the topics we discussed to help you think of questions if you forgot what we talked about 10 minutes ago, which happens to me all the time. And then since we're going to run out of time very soon, you can feel free to reach out to me on Instagram and LinkedIn. You can see them at the bottom of this slide, and they've been on every single slide. Just make sure to add a message. Otherwise, I'll think you're like a robot, So, okay, 5 minutes. What do we got? Any questions? Any secret success statements you've been holding on to you want to tell me about? Any of those, I'm happy to answer them. I love solving other people's team's problems. It's my favorite. Go ahead. Oh, I think the mic is running up to you. Thank you so much.
So the problem that I have is that often I would be the only one speaking in a meeting. So basically, the problem is how to motivate team members to engage.
One thing that we actually talk about at Netflix, which I really like, is that like silence isn't approval, right? So we've been in meetings in my team and people don't say anything, they'll be asked directly by the person running the team, like Jane, what do you think about this? Do you agree with this? Do you think we should change it? Like ask them directly and not just be like, does anyone have any questions? Because then everyone gets to just not do it because there's someone else will do it, right? But then they don't say anything, right? And I'll just call on people directly when they don't volunteer. I do that all the time. My favorite is every 2 weeks we do demos. I call for volunteers. Like, I don't know why they're surprised, because after I call for volunteers and all the volunteers do it, I individually call on each person to do it anyway. So it's only like, I'm only calling for volunteers to see who's like ready first. But then I make them all do it anyway. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Wow, sounds like you all have like really amazing teams and everything is great. I'm excited. Now I'm gonna work at your companies. All right, so what's gonna happen is I'm gonna say that time is up, and then 5 of you are gonna come to the stage and ask me questions while I pack up my bag, but that's fine. I'm happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much. Thank you, NDC, for having me. It was a blast. I hope to speak at more conferences. Thank you so much.